You can't say, well, the Jews are the chosen children of God, and these Germans are no good because their forefathers fought them. No. The Germans are no worse than the Jews. And the blacks are no worse than the Mexicans. And the Mexicans are no worse than the Filipinos. And the Filipinos are no worse than the Chinese. So how do you reach a one with that whole circle? How do you reach a one with that whole circle? How do you have peace on this earth? You can't have peace on this earth unless you let Second World War die. You want to keep the Second World War going? You want to keep selling and buying Germans and dead Indians on TV every day? You know, that's got to stop. The Second World War's got to stop. And it's got to stop in the Jews. The Jews won't let the Second World War stop. They keep the Second World War going. They keep it going. They keep it going. They keep perpetuating it because they're making money. As soon as the Second World War was over, they never stopped the brainwash. The brainwash that they were selling the American public was making money. You see what I'm saying? They were making money. They're not going to stop making money. If the combination's there to make money, they're going to keep selling it. They'll sell it all the way till I'm in the cell with a guy named Millman, Jerry Millman. And he's got pictures of Hitler and Japanese and things on. I said, boy, Hitler must have been a hell of a guy. He said, Hitler was terrible. I hate him. I hate him. I said, why do you hate him? He said, I'm a Jew. I said, well, why do you enshrine this guy? Is he your daddy? And he looked up to his mother's fear. And his mother's fear was Hitler. Hitler was like his father figure. He loved Hitler, but he hated Hitler. He needed Hitler to hold him up. Because Hitler was holding his hate up. Because without his hate, he didn't exist. He didn't have no reason to live unless he had some hate. He didn't have any reason to buy and sell unless the money held him up. If you took the money away from him, you took the hate away from him, he'd be gone. So how do you communicate to a whole group of people? You stand up and you take the worst fear symbol there is and say, there, now I've got your fear.
elders, 300 men, each of whom knows the others, govern the fate of the European continent, and they elect their successors from their entourage. And he went on to show that all these personages were Jews. The administration was always kept secret, even from the Jewish nation itself. Protocol 1. The best results in governing them are attained by violence and terrorism. The political has nothing in common with the moral. The ruler who governed by the moral is not a skilled politician, and is therefore unstable on his throne. He who wishes to rule must have recourse to both cunning and make-believe. Our power in the present tottering condition of all forms of power will be more invincible than any other, because it will remain invisible until the moment which it has gained such strength that no cunning can any longer undermine it. Out of the temporary evil we are now compelled to commit will emerge a good and unshakable rule, which will restore the regular course of machinery in national life, brought to a knot by liberalism. The result justifies the means. Let us, however, in our plans, direct our attention not so much to what is good and moral, as to what is necessary and useful. For the sake of victory, we must keep the program of violence and make-believe.
So the end result is that by following these links and by exploiting the social graph, the photo application became much more relevant to people than the other dozen or so similar looking, at least outwardly looking, photo applications that existed at the time. Today, we have about 20 billion unique photos stored in 4 resolutions, so that's 80 billion objects we're storing. Well over, I think, 2 to 3 billion photos are being uploaded every month. So it's a continually growing archive. But when we launched our photo product, we certainly weren't prepared for this growth, and we didn't envision that it would be quite this popular, because at that point, I don't think we even ourselves understood the power of the graph to really drive an application. I remember that, I conservatively provisioned about 6 months worth of storage, at least what I thought was 6 months, and we blew through that in maybe a week and a half. Scrambling for more machines, more disks. It was quite a challenge, but of course those are the great challenges to have. However, the most difficult aspect of serving this many photos is simply not storing them, but delivering them. We serve up about 600,000 unique images per second. then that is really a daunting number. That has actually driven most of the engineering effort that we've placed around serving photos. So let's take a look at how that works. Well, I said when we first started out, we didn't think the problem was quite as dramatic as it turned out to be. So, and we also were a small company, and in a small company, you can't solve every problem. And we had one engineer who was dedicated to back-end systems. And should we assign that one engineer to build a new photo storage architecture, or possibly to build a product feature that was truly unique to Facebook? And the answer there, of course, is you'll put your scarce engineering resources on building those things which are unique, and then try to buy solutions for those things that overlap with technology available in the industry. So we started using standard NFS-based file servers. We put a web server in front of them, introduced caching, and it was very easy to quickly get going. And then you start to optimize it. So we recognize that a portion of our images were viewed very frequently, and we looked at the various caching architectures that were available, but they weren't well suited for the very small objects that we were caching. So we built a new caching architecture, one based on combining memcache with lighting. We also saw that our NFS filers were not particularly efficient, and they were doing a lot of the same metadata lookups over and over. So by building an external file handle cache, we were able to improve upon the performance of those systems. But clearly, we could do better than that. And when looking at the actual technical limitation of serving photos in high volume, what we really recognized is a disk is a disk. Whether you buy that disk in an NFS server or whether the disk is simply configured in a commodity computer, you're really limited by the number of physical IOs that disk can perform. So the real question is, how many of those IOs do you use in order to serve an image? And then the lower that number, the more efficient you're going to be at serving images. So when we started out just using a standard network filer, we were serving about 10, we were needing about 10 physical IOs to serve every image. And that's because the filer had to walk down a very complex directory structure, none of which was in cache, because the caches in the filer weren't large enough to hold the hundreds of millions of images that we were needing to put on each machine. So they were not serving that application well. Through optimization techniques such as holding and remembering some of the filer metadata, setting the directory sizes to exactly match the size of a single allocation block on the filer, we were able to pull those numbers down into the range of maybe 2 to 4 physical IOs per file served. We knew we could do better. We knew the answer would be building our own file system. We built it as an overlay file system that simply aggregated lots of images into a single operating system level file, so that the OS metadata cache only had to deal with a much smaller number of objects. And we just maintained a very simple manifest in memory that mapped a file ID to its offset within a meta file, and then the length of that object within the meta file. And so by building this overlay file system, we were able to deliver a constant 1 physical IO per every image served, and extend the capacity of the installed hardware platform by a factor of 4.
Store everything. Right. So in the past, if you were going to do surveillance or wiretapping, you had to be kind of selective about it because there wasn't a way to record it easily. But now they can, and they can also do analysis later, after the fact, to find out if there was any evidence of a crime or even a pattern that might suggest illegal behavior.
Well, but this fundamentally changes how surveillance works, right? We're used to how we see it on television, follow that car, yeah. Right? That's surveillance.
That's right.
But now it's follow every car. And actually, it's follow every car all the time, and we can follow that car 6 months ago because we've saved the data.
Right.
So surveillance changes, and it's, in a lot of ways, it's not because of malice. Computers produce data
Right.
I mean, whenever you use your credit card, your cell phone, your computer, data about what you're doing and where is produced.
Right.
And as data storage drops to free, as data processing drops to free, it's easy to save it.
Why not save it then?
And so you have companies saving it, like a Facebook, a Google, they're saving it, governments are saving it, they're trading data. Right, Google provides data to governments when asked under certain rules.
Under subpoena, sometimes not.
Sometimes not, and often we don't know. I mean, last month, a bunch of human rights individuals asked politely Microsoft to tell them who they're letting spy on Skype video calls. Right, so we're asking nicely.
Did they get an answer?
We did not yet.
No, this is one of the concerns. There's a growing world of surveillance. We know that a lot of it's happening. We know a lot of money's being spent. We don't know where, and we don't know what they're recording.
And we often have no choice. I mean, I like to think, I don't like to think this, but it's sort of true that Google knows more about my interests than my wife does.
Yeah.
That's a little freaky.
And they're able to predict better what you might do next because of the pattern. They can match your pattern against another cohort.
And I've kind of never even met Google, let alone gone out of it.
Here's a question from Twitter, and the question is Minority Report. How long until we can predict when people will commit crimes? So how soon do you see that coming in the future?
Well, I mean, what are we asking? How long before we can predict? Probably never. I don't think those are things we can predict. How long before we're going to start using the ability that we think we can predict? Well, we're doing it today.
That's true. That's what the Raytheon Riot
That's what the no-fly list is.
That's true.
We predict that you are so dangerous that you're not allowed to fly for any reason, yet so innocent we can't arrest you. Kind of a weird mixed bag of people. So those things are coming, and I think they're going to become more and more. I think as technology gets more dangerous, as the things a bad guy can do increase. I mean, think about bioprinters, think about homemade, all the things we're scared of, homemade nuclear weapons.
Some of the topics we've covered on the show.
As those things get scarier, the desire to stop someone before the fact. And the only normal crime prevention is after the fact. Right? I'm going to let you murder somebody, and I'm going to arrest you after the fact. That only works if I can live with the murder rate. But that's not going to work if you're able to print a pathogen that drops a species. So there will be an incredible push for this before the fact.
Preemptive strike.
Right, which is the Minority Report type of future. It's going to be lousy, it's not going to work, but people are going to want it.
Arguably, that's what's going on in Yemen today, right? So we now, last week...
Signature strikes.
Exactly. NBC released this, this purloined document from the attorneys that basically gives Obama a permission slip to go ahead and assassinate American citizens off U.S. soil using a robot in the sky. Okay, so that occurred. What are they actually aiming for? They're not going for people who are in the process of conducting some sort of terrorist incident or building a bomb or something. They're targeting people who are at home. They're targeting people who are at a celebration, a wedding party or something. People who aren't actually doing anything necessarily criminal. It's the intent, the possibility, as you say, they're targeting them based on behavior and some measure of prediction.
Well, so they're a moderately higher bar for American citizens. This is the strict standard, right, is they have to be an imminent threat, and capture is infeasible, except imminent, it turns out, doesn't really mean imminent, because there doesn't have to be any kind of particular plot that they know is ongoing, so imminent means something other than imminent, and capture being infeasible means, I think basically it would be easier to kill them.
Right, inconvenient, I think, rather than feasible.
Now, if you had the bad taste to be born somewhere other than the United States, you don't even get that level of protection. Again, most of the drone strikes that are happening now are so-called signature strikes, meaning it's not there's a particular person who's targeted, but 5 20-year-old Arab males are congregated somewhere, and well, that's either a terrorist plot or a wedding, but better be safe than sorry.
Take them out. Tell me a little bit about total information awareness, this program that Admiral Poindexter proposed more than a decade ago, but I thought it went away, but it seems maybe it's coming back.
Right, the problem there was that they had terrible branding. They called it Total Information Awareness, which sounds creepy, and then they had a logo that was like an eye in a pyramid with beams coming down at the earth, so this sounded terrifying. Bill Sapphire wrote a column, freaking out about it. Everyone was duly alarmed. Congress nominally killed it, but it ended up getting essentially fragmented into a bunch of different programs that were farmed out to parts of DHS or DARPA. I think the NSA's Pinwheel database is in some sense an offshoot of that. Pinwheel is again, on this model, a kind of vast database that allows kind of Googling for communications. They've shifted from that kind of targeted model, get a warrant, have an individual wiretap their conversations, much more toward a model that involves, some people call it sitting on the wire, suck in everything, and then after the fact, figure out the search parameters you're interested, go through, pull stuff up. And that's concerning, I think, because, you know, when J. Edgar Hoover ran the FBI and was abusing surveillance for political purposes, at least he had to target particular people. You know, he's going to decide that Martin Luther King is going to be spied on, and then they're going to try and drive him to suicide. Now, this stuff is sitting in a database for 30 years. If they happen to sweep you up and then in 10 years you're running for Congress, someone can after the fact decide you're worth scrutinizing.
It's even conceivable that behavior that's legal today could change in the future, and there'll be some record of it, and that could be embarrassing on one hand, but it even might be that after the fact it's illegal.
Or even not. I mean, we all do things that are embarrassing because we're human.
Yeah.
And, you know, if everything is swept up, then
the likelihood of it being uncovered by somebody.
And if you can selectively edit it, and we see this now in political campaigns. You know, now we're living in a world where pretty much every candidate is followed 24/7 by the opposing party with a camera, because they're gonna say something that's embarrassing. And you got 10 seconds, and it's a beautiful, embarrassing quote, and you run with it.
They run like crazy.
We know one of the things the intelligence agencies like to do with the fruits of surveillance information is use it to coerce people into becoming informants. You know, the FBI now has 15,000 informants, like 10 times more than Hoover ever had at the peak of COINTELPRO, the kind of vast spying and infiltration network, you know, looking at civil rights and anti-war groups. And one way to do that is to say, hey, we found out that you're having an affair, why don't you spy on your mosque for us? There was a case here in Chicago, a guy named Ibrahim Mashal, I think. They said, look, we know that you had communications with a cleric in the Middle East. They were innocuous, but that's enough of a pretext to get someone put on the no-fly list. If your business requires you to travel, that's a huge obstacle. And they said, well, we can get you off the no-fly list if you're willing to cooperate, if you're willing to tell us what people are saying at your mosque. And he's actually currently now suing the Justice Department over this.
This speech was given before a patriotic audience in 1961 at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C. on behalf of Condi McGinley's patriotic newspaper of that time, Common Sense. Though in some minor ways this wide-ranging and extemporaneous speech has become dated, Mr. Friedman's essential message to us, his warning to the West, is more urgent than ever before. Listen.
Here in the United States, the Zionists and their co-religionists have complete control of our government. For many reasons, too many and too complex to go in here at this time. I'll be glad to answer questions, however, to support that statement. The Zionists and their co-religionists rule this United States as though they were the absolute monarchs of this country. Now you say, well, that's a very broad statement to make, but let me show what happened while you were... I don't want to wear that out. Let me show you what happened while we were all asleep. I'm including myself with you. We were all asleep. What happened? World War I broke out in the summer of 1914. 1914 was the year in which World War I broke out. There are a few people here my age who remember that. Now that war was waged on one side by Great Britain, France, and Russia, and on the other side by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. What happened? Within 2 years, Germany had won that war. Not alone won it nominally, but won it actually. The German submarines, which were a surprise to the world, had swept all the convoys from the Atlantic Ocean, and Great Britain stood there without ammunition for her soldiers, stood there with 1 week's food supply facing her, and after that, starvation. At that time, the French army had mutinied. They lost 600,000 of the flower of the French youth in the defense of Verdun on the Somme.
The Russian army was defecting. They were picking up their toys and going home. They didn't want to play war anymore. They didn't like the Tsar. And the Italian army had collapsed. Now, Germany, not a shot had been fired on the German soil. Not an enemy soldier had crossed the border into Germany. And yet, here was Germany offering England peace terms. They offered England a negotiated peace on what the lawyers call a status quo ante basis. That means, let's call the war off and let everything be as it was before the war started. Well, England in the summer of 1916 was considering that. Seriously. They had no choice. They was either accepting this negotiated peace that Germany was magnanimously offering them, or going on with the war and being totally defeated. While that was going on, the Zionists in Germany, who represented the Zionists from Eastern Europe, went to the British War Cabinet, and I'm going to be brief because this is a long story, but I have all the documents to prove any statement that I make. If anyone here is curious or doesn't believe what is possible. The Zionists in London went to the British War Cabinet and they said, look here, you can yet win this war. You don't have to give up. You don't have to accept the negotiated peace offered to you now by Germany. You can win this war if the United States will come in as your ally. The United States was not in the war at that time. We were fresh, we were young, we were rich, we were powerful. And they told England, we will guarantee to bring the United States into the war as your ally, to fight with you on your side, if you will promise us Palestine after you win the war. In other words, they made this deal. We will get the United States into this war as your ally. The price you must pay us is Palestine after you have won the war and defeated Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. Now, England had as much right to promise Palestine to anybody as the United States would have to promise Japan to Ireland for any reason whatsoever. It's absolutely absurd that Great Britain, that never had any connection or any interest or any right in what is known as Palestine, should offer it as coin of the realm to pay the Zionists for bringing the United States into the war. However, they made that promise in October of 1916. October 1916. And shortly after that, I don't know how many here remember it, the United States, which was almost totally pro-German, because the newspapers here were controlled by Jews, the bankers were Jews, all the media of mass communications in this country were controlled by Jews, and they were pro-German because their people, in a majority of cases, came from Germany, and they wanted to see Germany lick the Tsar. The Jews didn't like the Tsar, and they didn't want Russia to win this war. So the German bankers, the German Jews, Kuhn Loeb, and the other big banking firms in the United States refused to finance France or England to the extent of $1. They stood aside and they said, as long as France and England are tied up with Russia, not 1 cent. But they poured money into Germany. They fought with Germany against Russia, trying to lick the Tsarist regime. Now, those same Jews, when they saw the possibility of getting Palestine, they went to England and they made this deal. At that time, everything changed, like the traffic light that changes from red to green, where the newspapers had been all pro-German, where they'd been telling the people the difficulties that Germany was having fighting Great Britain commercially and in other respects. All of a sudden, the Germans were no good. They were villains, they were Huns, they were shooting Red Cross nurses, they were cutting off babies' hands, and they were no good. Well, shortly after that, Mr. Wilson declared war on Germany. The Zionists in London sent these cables to the United States to Justice Brandeis, go to work on President Wilson. We're getting from England what we want. Now you go to work, and you go to work on President Wilson and get the United States into the war. And that did happen. That's how the United States got into the war. We had no more interest in it. We had no more right to be in it than we have to be on the moon tonight instead of in this room. Now the war, World War I, in which the United States participated, had absolutely no reason to be our war. We went in there, we were railroaded into it. If I can be vulgar, we were suckered into that war merely so that the Zionists of the world could obtain Palestine. Now, that is something that the people in the United States have never been told. They never knew why we went into World War I. Now, what happened? After we got into the war, the Zionists went to Great Britain and they said, well, we performed our part of the agreement. Let's have something in writing that shows that you are going to keep your bargain and give up Palestine after you win the war, because they didn't know whether the war would last another year or another 10 years. So they started to work out a receipt. The receipt took the form of a letter, and it was worded in very cryptic language so that the world at large wouldn't know what it was all about. And that was called the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was merely Great Britain's promise to pay the Zionists what they had agreed upon as a consideration for getting the United States into the war. So this great Balfour Declaration that you hear so much about is just as phony as a $3 bill, and I don't think I can make it more emphatic than that. Now, that is where all the trouble started. The United States was in the war. The United States crushed Germany. We went in there, and it's history, you know what happened. Now, when the war was ended, and the Germans went to Paris, to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, there were 117 Jews there as a delegation representing the Jews, headed by Bernard Baruch. I was there, I ought to know. Now what happened? The Jews at that peace conference, when they were cutting up Germany and parceling out Europe to all these nations that claimed a right to a certain part of European territory, the Jews said, how about Palestine for us? And they produced, for the first time, to the knowledge of Germans, this Balfour Declaration. So the Germans, for the first time, realized, oh, that was the game. That's why the United States came into the war. And the Germans, for the first time, realized that they were defeated. They suffered this terrific reparations that was slapped onto them because the Zionists wanted Palestine. And they were determined to get it at any cost. Now that brings us up to another very interesting point. When the Germans realized this, they naturally resented it. Up to that time, the Jews had never been better off in any country in the world than they had been in Germany. You had Mr. Rathenau there, who was maybe 100 times as important in industry and finance as Bernard Baruch in this country. You had Mr. Ballin, who owned the two big steamship lines, the North German Lloyd and the Hamburg American Line, thank you. You had Mr. Bleichroeder, who was the banker for the Hohenzollern family. You had the Warburgs in Hamburg, who were the big merchant bankers, the biggest in the world. The Jews were doing very well in Germany. No question about that. Now, the Germans felt, well, that was quite a sellout. It was a sellout that I can best compare. Suppose the United States was at war today with the Soviet Union. And we were winning. And we told the Soviet Union, well, let's quit. We offer you peace terms. Let's forget the whole thing. And all of a sudden, Red China came into the war as an ally of the Soviet Union. And throwing them into the war brought about our defeat, a crushing defeat, with a reparation the likes of which man's imagination cannot encompass.